Good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Okay, so we've moved on to Masechet Niddah. There's a lot of, I got to attend this Masechet, so B'ezrat Hashem will be dealing with this a lot. And so this week I want to talk about a shul that existed in Nehardea about 1,600 years ago. The shul was known as Shaf Viativ.
Where's Nehardea?
In Babylon, in Iraq. That's where the head was a center of the Amoraim. It was the center of Amoraim. There was a big yeshiva there, like Rav and Shmuel and all that there, in that area. And there's a story that we'll read now in the Gemara Niddah, which takes us into this whole discussion about this particular shul. Try to understand if there is significance to this shul, and then we'll see that that can lead us into a broader discussion about the Shekhinah and the presence of the Shekhinah and perhaps different ways of understanding the presence of the Shekhinah. At the end, we'll maybe even get into a little bit of Kabbalah, a little Chassidus, we'll see. Okay, let's get started. The Gemara Niddah Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay, so the context of Niddah Yud Gimel is about seminal emissions and about the issur of when you go to the bathroom of you need to be careful, how you do it so that you don't lead yourself to arousal. So the Gemara says as follows: Rav Yehuda v'Shmuel havu kaime ha'Igra de Beit Knesset de Shaf Viativ B'Nehardea. So Rav Yehuda and Shmuel, Rav Yehuda was the student of Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda and Shmuel were standing on the roof of this shul Shaf Viativ in Nehardea. Okay, Amar le Rav Yehuda l'Shmuel tzarich ani la'ashtin. This is great. So Rav Yehuda turns to Shmuel and says, "I need to pee." Right? Amar le shinana. So Shmuel says back to him, toothed one, which is a compliment of someone who's sharp. Achoz ba'amatcha ve'ashten lachutz. So he says to him, great, grab your member and direct it off the roof, outwards. So, heichi avid hachi. So the Gemara says, how could Shmuel have told Rav Yehuda that he was allowed to do this? Ve'atanya Rabbi Eliezer omer kol ha'ochez ba'amato mashtin ki'ilu mevi mabul la'olam. Right, isn't there a braita that teaches us that anybody who holds his member when he goes to the bathroom, it's as though he's bringing a flood to the world, out of the chashash that he'll lead himself to hashchatat zera levatala. Amar Abaye asa'o kivoleshet. So Abaye said it's similar to the case of the marauders. Okay, what does that mean? The Tanan says the Mishnah boleshet shnichnas le'ir b'shat shalom chaviyot ptuchot asurot stumot mutarot. So if you have the case of a city, and you have a marauding group of non-Jews who come through the city. So if it's a time of peace, so any open barrels of wine are forbidden to drink from, and any closed barrels of wine are permitted to drink from. How come? The assumption is that it's a time of peace. These marauders are coming through. They're not Jewish. Open barrels, they might use it for avodah zarah, and then it becomes you're not allowed to use that. But if the barrels are closed, you don't have to be worried that they use the wine. B'shat milchama elu ve'elu mutarot. But when it's a time of war and this group of non-Jews come through the city, even if the barrels are open, you're allowed to use the wine. Why? Because you assume it's wartime. They're not going to take your wine from the open barrels and go and do avodah zarah in the middle of the war. So alma, apparently we can derive from this, kevan de bayite lo ati lenesuche. So since they are afraid, they won't come to do nesech. They won't come to offer or korban with the wine. Hachanami kevan debeite lo ati lehirhure. So what does that have to do with our case? So Abaye claims when Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, you're allowed to machzik ba'amatcha and mashtim b'chutz, it's because he would be afraid. And when he's afraid, we don't have to be worried that that action will lead him to inappropriate thoughts, which will then lead to a sin. So what's he afraid of? He's standing on the roof of a shul. What's he afraid of? So the Gemara gives a lot of different possibilities. It says, Ibait ema bituta de leila v'deigra. So the first answer is very straightforward. It says it's nighttime and he's standing on the roof of a building. So he's just on edge, right? It's going to be hard to arouse oneself when it's dark and you're standing on top of a building and you're near the edge. So that the fear of just falling. V'ibait ema bituta de rabbe. Or because he's standing in front of Shmuel, who's his Rav. So, that's the fear of his Rav. V'ibait ema bituta de Shechina. Or because of the Shechina. Okay, we'll get back to that. V'ibait ema emata de mare ale. The kare Shmuel ale enze yiludisha. Or if you want, you can say the fear of his master, which means HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because Shmuel used to say about Rav Yehuda, he's not born of woman. Right? This is a man who he lives in a constant He's almost angelic. He lives in a constant fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for whatever reason, that's different than the fear of the Shekhinah, which we'll get to in a minute. V'bait ema nisui hava. Or if you want, you can say the fear is for, it's not that he's afraid. The reason why he was allowed to do it isn't for fear, but because he was married. The Amar of Nachman imaya nisui mutar, right? That when you go to the bathroom, if you're married, we're not afraid if you are machazik amatcha, that it will lead to anything. V'bait ema ki ha urile. The Tane Abba bered Rabbi Binyamin bar Abba of Masai bebeit milamata. Another answer is that if you grab from below, if you grab the beitzim, so then that won't lead you, as long as you do it in the right way, it won't lead to any stimulation. The Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Gvul yesh lo me'atar u'lamata, mutar me'atar u'lamala asur. That there's the corona. If you touch the corona and below, it doesn't stimulate, so that's allowed. If you touch above the corona, that it does stimulate, and it's forbidden. Okay, and it goes into a lot more detail in that sugya, which is lo l'inyanenu. The point is, we're talking about this shul shaf viativ, and the Gemara mentions as part of it this idea of bi'tuta d'shchina, the fear of the Shechina, the fear of Kadosh Baruch Hu. So let's try to understand is there any significance to this shul that is being mentioned at the beginning of the story. Okay, so Rashi in his commentaries on the Shaf Viativ, he says, Shem makom amuvla b'malchut Nehardea mipi Moria Zaken. So Rashi says, Shaf Viativ, what does that mean? It's the name of a place that was swallowed up or subsumed in the kingdom of Nehardea. Okay, that's just the name of a location. Very nice. The Eitz Yosef in his commentary quotes Rashi in a different sugya who suggests differently. So if you see where it says the Shaf Viativ, in the screenshot on the bottom on the right side where it's the big hay. The Eitz Yosef, yeah. It's all the way on the bottom on the right side. The Shaf Viativ. So Ayin Rashi Kan. So see what we just saw. Uverosh Hashanah Daf Chavdal Amud Bet Pi Rashi. The Shaf Viativ B'Nehardea Makom Hu. V'yesh potrim shecharav v'chazar v'nivna. V'tamid hayta shechina mitzuya sham. And Rashi in Avodah Zarah gives a different suggestion where he says that there's some who interpret it to mean that this shul had been destroyed, and then it came back and was rebuilt, and the Shekhinah had always been present there. Okay? V'yechonia v'galuto b'na'uhu v'nas'u imahem me'avnei Yerushalayim. So Yechonia, if you remember, he was 11 years before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. There was a galut of the royalty of Malchut Yehuda. It was in the reign of Yechonia. So 11 years later, everybody else was also exiled. So Yechonia was exiled along with the royalty of the palace 11 years before. So here Rashi seems to be claiming that Yechonia and those who were exiled with him, they took stones with them from Eretz Yisrael, from Yerushalayim, and they used that to build this shul Shaf Viativ in Nehardea. And about them the pasuk says, "Ki ratzu avadecha et avanea," right? That your servants wanted the stones. That's a reference to this shul. Okay, what does the name Shaf Viativ have to do with this idea? So Rashi in Avodah Zarah, v'hainu de Shaf Viativ ben Nehardea nishuf kan v'nitiyashev kan, v'hainu dichtiv ki ratzu avadecha et avanea. That the words Shaf Viativ in Aramaic, Nishuf means destruction, and Yativ is like Yishuv means settlement. Okay, so this shul was destroyed and then settled, and that's why it's called Shaf Viativ. But then there's that added layer of Yechonia and his galut. So what is that about, right? Okay, the shul is destroyed and rebuilt, fine, but we have Yerushalayim. So the truth is, Rashi isn't the first one to mention this. This tradition isn't found in the Gemara anywhere, but it's found in the Geonim, in particular the Igeret of Shir Gaon, right? So Shir Gaon, he has this famous Igeret where he details the history of the oral Torah Shebaal Peh, and he goes through the difference between the Mishnah and the Morim, the Savarim, and all this. And then the screenshot is very small, but we will try to read where he talks about this particular tradition. And this is one of the earliest sources in this Igeret of this idea. So if you see where it's bracketed off on the left side, it says as follows: Havu yad'ei de mi'ikar akad galu Yisrael begalut Yechonia. So initially, Yisrael was exiled in the galut of Yechonia. Ve'acharesh ve'amasger. Here the royalty was exiled. V'chama nevi'im imahem, and there were some prophets with them. Aitinu Nehardea. They got to Nehardea. Banu Yechonia melech Yehuda v'siato Beit Knesset. And Yechonia the king and his fellows who were exiled with him, they built a shul once they got to Nehardea. ויזדו באבנים ועפר שהביאו עמהם מבית המקדש. Okay, and they built that shul with the stones and the dust, or the dirt that came from the Beit HaMikdash, which was about to be destroyed. To fulfill this pasuk. ואת העפרה וקראו לה בית כנישתא בני כנישתא דשף ויתיב, and they called the shul of Shaf Viativ בנהרדעא. כלומר, why? Sorry, it's hard for me to read the screenshot. It's a bit too blurry. Beit HaMikdash, so I'll read it actually on the English translation on the other side. So what does it mean, Shaf Viativ Nehardea? It means that the Beit HaMikdash traveled and settled here. So it's a bit different than what the Eitz Yosef quoted in the name of Rashi. Right, the Eitz Yosef quoted in the name of Rashi that there is this tradition that Yechoniah brought stones from Yerushalayim to build the shul, but the name Shaf Viativ is because the shul in Nehardea was destroyed and built. What Rav Shur Gaon is saying here is it's called Shaf Viativ because the Beit HaMikdash, as it were, that it's as though the Beit HaMikdash was taken from Yerushalayim and brought to the Shaf Viativ in Nehardea. In other words, the stones came not just from Yerushalayim that were then destroyed and built in Nehardea, but the stones came from the Beit HaMikdash and they symbolized the Beit HaMikdash itself being destroyed in Yerushalayim and moving to Nehardea, to this particular location. And then he quotes the Gemara in Megillah, which we'll see shortly. So you see that according to Rav Shir Gaon, now we're already talking about a lot of significance to this shul. This shul is the Beit HaMikdash, relocated after the Galut, right? So this is not just some other shul, but one that has a lot of significance according to this tradition. We'll see now that it goes much further than that. There's a Gemara in Avodah and Daf Mem Gimel Medbet where we quoted Rashi, which is talking about various isurim of Avodah Zarah, which makes sense. And it asks if you have statues, but statues that are not meant for worship, but for ornamentation. Like, what's the halachic status of that? And there's a suggestion in the Gemara that says even if it's just an ornament, we should be afraid that it might be that people might think that it's for Avodah Zarah and that it might be Ein Hara. And then the Gemara says, Umi chayshinan nechashada, are we really afraid of something like that? V'habik be knishtah to Shaf Viativ b'Nehardea. So in this shul, to okme be andarta, that there was a statue of the king of Bavel for an ornament in the shul. V'havu aile be avud de Shmuel v'levi umatzlu b'gabei. That the father of Shmuel, remember Shmuel went to that shul in this story in Niddah, so we have here even his father used to go there, and Levi, they went there and they davened in the shul, even though there was this huge statue of the king in the shul. And they weren't afraid that people would think that they were davening to the idol, to the statue. The Gemara answers Rabim Shani, right? It's different when it's in a public place. For whatever reason, it's part, but if it's in an individual, maybe it's a bit different. Okay, so we see here again that there's a significance to the shul in the sense that the king has a huge statue of himself in the shul. Okay, let's get into go a bit more esoteric, a bit more mystical. Okay, so the Gemara in Megillah Daf Chavtet Amud Aleph. So it starts with a famous teaching. It says, Tanya, Ustar, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Bo re'eh kama chavivin Yisrael lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Come see how beloved Bnei Yisrael were in the eyes of Hashem. Shebechol makom shegalu shechina mehem. Every time they went into exile, the shechina went with them. Right? Galu Mitzrayim, shechina mehem shneimar, niglo nigleti leveit avicha v'yotam Mitzrayim. Right? The shechina went with them into exile in Egypt. Galu lebavel shechina mehem shneimar lemanchem shulachti bavela. Went also with them into Galut and Bavel. And when they come back to Eretz Yisrael one day, the Shechina will come with them. Okay. And then the Gemara asks, so until this point I would say, okay, fine, very nice. Shechina goes into Galut with Bnei Yisrael, where they go, it's a sign that Hashem's presence is with us. And then the Gemara says something very strange. Bebavel hecha. Okay, so we said the Shechina goes with them to Mitzrayim, the Shechina goes with them to Bavel, the Shechina is going to come with them back to Eretz Yisrael. Where in Bavel is the Shechina? Amar Abaye bevei knishtah the Hutzal, uvevei knishtah the Shaf Viativ b'Nehardea. The Shechina is in two specific places. It's in the shul in Hutzal and the shul of Shaf Viativ in Nehardea. V'late mahafech hacha v'hacha, and don't think that it's in both of them at the same time. Ela zimnin hacha v'zimnin hacha. The Shechina is either in one or the other. Amar Abaye, Tetili, Techi merachakna parsa ailina umatzleina hatam. And Abaye says, I should be blessed with brachot Because anytime I'm within a parsa of either one of these shuls, I go to them and I daven there, and that should bring bracha to me because the Shechina is found in those shuls, but not at the same time, either one or the other.
No mention of liquid.
Sorry?
No mention of liquid.
No mention of liquid. Well, this liquid wasn't around yet. I don't know. Maybe there's some story of the stones of Shavuot that get rebuilt in New Jersey. I don't know.
Also, it wasn't in the yeshiva, it was in the Beit Knesset where they daven.
They don't daven in the liquid.
They do, but they daven everywhere. The liquid's on for the learning.
Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. Avua de Shmuel v'Levi, havo yatve b'Keniשתא de Shavuot B'Nehardea. So you remember them from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that Shmuel's father and Levi were sitting one time in the shul Shavuot. Atay Shechina. Shechina showed up. Shma'u kol rigsha. They heard a loud sound. Kamu v'unufaku. So they stood up and they left. As the Shechina showed up in the shul, there was some noise, and they left when they realized that the Shechina was there. Rav Sheshet Havayati b'Bnei Knishtah Shavuot B'Nehardea. Rav Sheshet one time was sitting in the shul. Atay Shechina. The Shechina showed up. V'lo nafak, but he didn't leave. Atu malachei hasharet v'ka miva'atu lei. So the angels came and tried to scare him out. Amar lefanav, and he davened, Ribono shel olam, aluv v'she'eno aluv mi nidchem mipnei mi. So if Sheshet davens and he says to Hashem, if you have somebody who's aluv, is downtrodden, wretched, and someone who's not, so who gets priority over who? Meaning what? What's Rav Sheshet saying? In other words, he's saying if it's me and the Shechina, who should get to stay? It's me. I'm the wretched one here, right? So Amar lehu shivku. So then the Shechina said to the angels, leave him alone. He's right.
Why can neither of them stay when the Shechina's there?
I don't know. This Gemara, I meant to look a bit more into it to try to understand what's happening. But something about the presence of the Shechina in this shul, when it comes. I mean, first of all, the fact that Shechina shows up, right, as opposed to always being there. There's a clear sense of Shechina, Atay Shechina. And then when it comes, it being something that requires you to leave, right? That there's something really unique about this shul. It's being called out as such. As to why they have to leave, it's not really clear from the Gemara itself.
Maybe it's like, I'm like, aluv yoter, so you should leave.
Shalom.
Yeah, a few more minutes. It's like,
Say it again.
אומר, אולי בגלל שזה מי נדחה מפני מי, והוא אומר, אני עלוב יותר בעצם, so then I need to go away and just let him to try to be less עלוב. I don't know.
Rav Sheshet to be less alov.
Yeah. Like,
Meaning once the Shechina comes in comparison, he's alov to the Shechina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, מי נדחה מפני מי, like, take them back to the sky, I don't know, I should stay here.
The Malchei HaSharet, I got you. You're saying it's a way of him saying this isn't the place of Malchei HaSharet here.
Maybe, I was like, they shouldn't be here around with me.
Could be. We'll see actually very soon that this idea comes up also in a different place, and there's different ways to understand it. Okay, let's skip the end of the Gemara and Megillah. Let's lean in. So the Maharsha, in his commentary on this Gemara and Megillah, he says as follows. Okay, Ba'aruch be'er shaf perush begalut yichonya v'siyato kad atu lenehardea banu knishtah v'sto bavanim be'afar da'iteu b'hardeu mi'beit hamikdash v'chulei. So first of all, the Maharsha notes that the Aruch as well brings this tradition of Yechonia and his group taking from the Beit HaMikdash and bringing it. Okay, so the Aruch was also predated Rashi. Okay, the Rav Shirga and the Aruch. This is a tradition that made its way that surfaced towards the time of the Geonim, and we see it popping up already earlier, and then Rashi, of course, as well. וקראו שף ויתיב, כלומר שנשא מקדש וישב שם. Okay, and here it's as explicit as you can be. The Beit HaMikdash actually shaf ויתיב. That's why it's called the shaf ויתיv shul. It's the Beit HaMikdash itself relocated in Bavel. והייתה שכינה עם הון, and the Shechina was there, כדאמרינן במגילה, right? הבבל היכא שריה שכינתא בכנישתא דשב ויתיב בנהרדעא. And that's what we read inside, ein shan, והיינו דאמרינן הכא משום באיתותא דשכינה. דבאהו כנישתא שריה שכינה כמו במקדש. So the Maharsha is connecting this Gemara in Megillah to our original sugya in Niddah, right? If you remember, it gave 8 or 9 reasons to why Rav Yehuda was allowed to go to the bathroom off the edge of the shul, and one of them was that the fear of the Shechina would restrain him from being stimulated in any way. So the Maharsha says that's not just stam; it's because the Shechina is in the Beit HaMikdash, is in the shul shaf yativ, as we see from the Gemara in Megillah, that the Shechina comes and is so overpowering that it scares away these big Amoraim. So the Shechina is there. So that's why there's a bituta, right? Because even Shmuel's father was scared out by the noise of the Shechina. So Rav Yehuda would also have that be a tuta the Shechina. So the Maharsha makes that connection between the two sugyot here. But then he adds, Mihu b'shar Beit Knesset nami ika lememar, t'chol be'asar shechinta sharia. He says, but you don't have to go there, because we know in general, whenever there's 10 people, the Shechina is around. Every time you have 10, every time there's a minyan. So any shul that has, is a place of the Shechina, right? So, you could understand Bituta the Shechina just he's standing on top of a shul. You don't have to go to this place that this shul specifically is special. But he says, we see in the Gemara and Megillah that there is something special about the shul, so it adds an extra layer of the Bituta to Rav Yehuda. And so, he doesn't, he says you can say the general statement, but it's worth also pointing out this particular shul had extra Shechina, as it were.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had to leave, so to speak, when it entered, versus in a minyan, you have to stay.
Well, it's a catch-22. If you left, there wouldn't be a minyan.
Exactly.
Oh, you're saying, what if
So
you're the
it
10th
must be a
person and the
different-
Shechina comes? Huh?
Yeah, it must be a different level of Shekhinah residing. I don't know what that means, but anyway.
Yeah, good. So what does that even mean? All right, so we'll touch on that, but it's a good point. I hadn't actually connected those dots. The story is brought in the Gemara and Megillah. It's always individuals or pair, right? Shmuel's father and Levi, Rav Sheshet. It's not talking about there were 10 rabbis assembled and the Shechina showed up.
Right.
No, if there's 10, the Shechina is already there, I guess, and then you can't leave. I don't know, but there's something else going on in these episodes. And again, this isn't some esoteric Kabbalistic work. This is the Gemara and Megillah, so it's very interesting. Just to go back to Kobe's point from before, so there's a Gemara in Tani and Ted Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay, so the story of Yonah, right? He comes to prophesy against Nineveh. He says, right? That you 40 days, everything's going to be destroyed. And then for, very surprisingly, the whole city just goes and does tshuva, Nineveh. Right? And the Navi tells us, they called that to God with strength. They did full tshuva. My amor, what did they say in their tshuva that was accepted by God? Amru lefanav ribono shel olam aluv v'sheino aluv tzadik v'rasha mi nidchem mipnei mi. Okay, so you see here the same language that Rav Sheshet used when the Shechina showed up in the Beit Knesset, the Shaf Yativ, which is very interesting because this is Nineveh, right? The people of Nineveh, and it adds here tzadik v'rasha in addition to what we saw by Rav Sheshet. So it's comparing aluv v'sheino aluv to tzadik and rasha. That an aluv is a tzadik and eno aluv is a rasha. So how can we understand this? So the Maharsha actually brings two interpretations. Pi Rashi. So Maharsha says, Rashi explains this to mean Have omer tzaddik mipnei rasha ad kan l'shono. That if you have a tzaddik and you have a rasha, so the rasha has to be nidcha before the tzaddik because he's a tzaddik. So the rasha has to get pushed away. So the people of Nineveh are saying we're doing tshuva, so we're tzaddikim. So you have to, I think, is that what it means?
צדיק נדחה מפני הרשע.
Tzaddik nidchem mipnei harasha.
That's what I think he's saying.
Yeah, and then why would that?
Because it's exactly, I think it's like kind of a tshuva saying. It's like we sing on Rosh Hashanah. It's rasha takablo, im yeshu ben drako, yomiyad takablo.
Okay, right.
Maybe it's like the same point, like, you're already a tzaddik, it's like, okay, you good? Now the rasha, let's try to like, let him do tshuva, to be good again.
Should get more attention.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you might be right. I confused myself because it says here in the Be'en Yaakov b'shem chidushin perush behefech that he says Rashi and then the Ein Yaakov they have opposite interpretations. What does the Ein Yaakov say? B'chol dor vador ifshar shlo yehei sham tzadik. Every generation has to have at least one tzaddik. Just that's the way it works. Ve'im ken ach nidachin mipnei reshaim. So his understanding is, since every generation has some righteous people, but we know there's wickedness in the world, so how can the tzaddik be pushed aside by the reshaim? V'hainu b'choska mipnei shehi tshuva nitzachat. And this is why it says they called that b'choska, meaning that they had a winning argument, that was something that couldn't be refuted as an argument. Yeah, I understood this better when I first prepared it. I'm not quite sure what that means. But it might be along the lines of what Kobe was saying. Need to think about this a bit more.
יש פשוט אינשטיין או משהו?
Where's this Tanya? There you go. Ted Zayin Amud Aleph. While you're looking that up, so I want to finish off with kind of the question that we've been dancing around, which is, I thought the Shekhinah was everywhere. So how can you have this idea of Shekhinah Gola Imahen? And how can you have specifically the Shekhinah is coming to specific shuls and leaving them and not in two shuls at the same time? There seems to be this paradox between, on the one hand, the presence of the Shekhinah being everywhere, and on the other hand, it being located in very specific places.
Or at least some sort of level system where there's like some level of Hashem everywhere, but there's also more concentrated.
Good. So we're going to, we're heading to that. Yeah, go ahead.
זה אומר פה, אמרו לפניו ריבונו של עולם עלוב ושאינו עלוב, צדיק ורשע מי נדחה מפני מי? ודאי הצדיק מוותר לרשע, ואף אתה ראוי לך שתרחם עלינו.
ודאי הצדיק מה לרשע?
מוותר לרשע. Like gives him his place.
We're the Rishayim, so you should forgive us because you're tzaddik, Hashem. Okay.
I don't get the עלוב ושאינו עלוב. I guess it's another way to say tzaddik ורשע.
Yeah, I would think so. So that's Rashi's explanation, what you just said. And then the Ein Yaakov says the opposite, and don't quite understand the Ein Yaakov as much. But okay, that clarifies it. Okay, so let us... Okay, so if you look at the Yefei Toar, we'll skip Shmot Rabbah, but if you look at the Yefei Toar, which is a commentary on Shmot Rabbah, he says as follows: Uchmo de'ita b'mechilta of a Megillah, kol makom shegalu shchina imahem. Okay, every place that Bnei Yisrael went, the Shechina went with them, we saw that. Uperush hashkachat arba'a amiyuchedet Hashem's, thank you. Hashkachat Hashem amiyuchedet, kmo shekatavnu kama pe'amim. Right, that this is talking about, like Shimon just said, some yuchedet, some unique, extra level, additional hashgacha, as is written in several places. And he says, and this doesn't contradict the fact that it says in different Gemara that the Shekhinah is everywhere. Uval in Yaakov katav v'sod hashchina shenikred lifamim kala ulifamim Knesset Yisrael lifamim malka v'shemot acherim yadu leba'alei ha'emet. Okay, so the author of the Ein Yaakov himself also has a commentary here and there on the Ein Yaakov. So he says that the Sod, which is the Kabbalists, so they note that the Shekhinah has a bunch of different names, right? Sometimes she's called a bride, sometimes she's called Knesset Yisrael, sometimes a queen, and different names, as is known to the Kabbalists, that each of these signifies some different level of hashgacha, that there's some deep secret to this. I think this question of how can the Shekhinah be concentrated in one place and not in other places, so there's kind of the more systematic approach of the Ari with Tzimtzum and talking about how it's possible for there be God's presence everywhere but not in certain places. But I think in the Midrashic literature it just kind of accepts the paradox, but it does give an interesting mashal, which helps us understand it a little bit, which is this Tanchumi Lamdenu in Vayakel. It says as follows: V'alo kvar ne'emar halot hashamayim ve'et haaretz ani maleh. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that says, "I fill all the heavens and the earth." Amar Rabbi Yeshua desichnin b'shem Rabbi Levi mashal lime'ara shehi netuna al sfat hayam. So it's an analogy for a cave that's on the edge of the sea. Ga'ash hayam, so you have high tide, the waves come in. Nitmalet ha'me'ara v'hayam lo chasar klum. Right, the cave fills up with water from the wave, but it's an unnoticeable difference in the sea. Kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu yitbarach zichro. Af al pi shekatuv v'chvod Hashem alei mishkan. Even though it says Hashem's presence filled the Mishkan, af al pi chen hodo al et shamayim. Right, that His presence can somehow fill the Mishkan while still being everywhere. V'lo tomar shetzimtzem HaKadosh Baruch Hu shchinato b'toch HaMishkan. And this is interesting because this Medrash Tanchuma, it says, don't say, and it uses the word tzimtzum, right? Don't say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzamtzem shchina in the Mishkan, right? He came and he did a hyper concentration in the Mishkan. Ela af b'toch ha'aron she'asa b'tzalel tzimtzem shchinato. So it's that his shchina was not just concentrated in the Mishkan; it was concentrated in the Aron. Shneimar hinei Aron habrit adon kol haaretz. Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'aya b'tocho. This is a reference to Hashem that was inside it. So I think this is interesting in the sense that there is a bit of a difference between the analogy and the nimshal, the mashal and the nimshal, because the mashal says you have a cave that's empty,
Right.
you have a sea, and the sea comes and fills the cave and leaves and empties the cave. But when you say that the Kvod Hashem Malei Mishkan, it's not that the Aron is empty of the Shechina, and then the Shechina comes and fills the Aron. It's that the Shechina is everywhere, and there's an extra concentration somehow of the Shechina in the Aron. So there is, I mean,
it doesn't upset the balance of the Shekhinah of that in another way. Doesn't really, because you think of it, water's what as in the human body as in the world 70%.
okay.
So in other words, if it fills, it doesn't fill the the cave, if you like. There's no doesn't lessen the rate of water, so to speak. So you think that's maybe relevant to the Shekhinah is again the whole idea of the symptom is, but yet he is still there. Yet the Shekhinah is still there. It's not. He may be quote unquote lessen himself, but he's still there at the same time.
Also, the water analogy is a finite thing. Isn't the point that Hashem is infinite, and in being in the Mishkan doesn't mean he's not everywhere else as well. The water thing is just a perception thing. It fills the cave, but they don't see any less water in the ocean.
You're saying there actually is less water; it's just not noticeable.
Yeah, it's finite.
Right.
It's the same amount of water, it's just in different places. Whereas Hashem was saying it's just a bad mashal, because Hashem was saying is he fills the Mishkan, but also he stays everywhere else at the same time. He's not lessened and moved.
Right. That's fair.
I mean, it could be the mashal just it's talking about the perception. I mean, the same way you see it with the cave, but it doesn't. You don't notice it.
Yeah, I think it would say it's not talking about the actual measurement, more the perception of it. But like I said, I have a problem with the mashal is difficult for me for another reason, which is the cave is empty, and the water comes in and out. But the Shekhinah is everywhere by default. So I'm having more concentration of it, and it's not chasar the rest of it. But still, it's not filling a vacuum. It's filling a place where the Shekhinah already was with more Shekhinah.
Well, I mean, maybe you have to understand that Shemayim Va'aretz doesn't mean every ounce of space, but it means literally the sky and earth. Like the dirt, the ground. I don't know.
Right.
And that's why, even if it goes in the Shekhinah, it's still fully there. But unless it enters something specific, a building, it's not there. It's in the heavens and in the I don't know, whatever.
I think there's another.
You understand Shemayim Va'aretz as every space.
Right.
But maybe it doesn't mean that. I don't know.
The whole idea, not only of the tzimtzum, I think there's also the whole idea of the mitzotzot, the whole idea of you think of the idea of Beit HaMikdash becoming it's prevalent within the Midrash that that as if each Jew or each one of us practically, when upon leaving Eretz Israel, took a piece of Beit HaMikdash with them and built with it a shul, and anywhere they went. So you think of this idea where Yechonia has built this shul in Bavel. I think it's also the idea of how the kedusha has, if you like, quote unquote, spread. Yet it's also spread and also centered at the same time.
Right. Yeah, definitely. To your point, definitely the message of this idea that the actual stones of the Beit HaMikdash were brought and used to build this shul. Nehardea is saying this is a Mikdash Math, right? That this is the tradition, what the Beit HaMikdash symbolized, we're establishing here in Nehardea, right? This is like Chazal telling us, like, this is the continuation of the Beit HaMikdash is happening here in Galut, in this place, and there's a significance to that for sure. That's I think the message perhaps behind the story here, but.
I think also, if you think of it, that's what the Shmot Rabbah said. He says that it doesn't matter where they've gone. Think of Bavel and Bandai and and Mitzrayim and whatever. Then Hashem or the Shekhinah were always with them wherever they left. Although this is something we've discussed earlier, I think that that there is a special, in a way, standing to Bavel is to itself. Bavel is a unique, has its unique purpose or idea, where it's more accepted definitely than other places, especially Egypt as a place that you theoretically shouldn't return to, and you see that in the Torah. Why can't a king have too many horses? Because he'll return the people back to Mitzrayim. So in other words, there is something that is definitely, even though Jewish people have at the end of the day returned to Egypt more than once, but having Bavel have its own stance, its own.
Well, keep in mind who's writing these Midrashim as well.
Obviously.
Right.
Well, and then you have, what was that? Shlaki that said to, what was that? I forgot the name of the Amorah, that he says, Aleha sanin alechu. God hates you for staying there in Bavel, and then, when he was, Shlaki shavi avisachi biyardena, when he was swimming. So, in other words, if you stay there too long, if you fall in love, quote unquote, with Bavel, eventually that's not your ultimate goal. That's not where you should be staying long term.
Right.
So there's that. I mean, it's okay. So you can go there as a shlichut, and have the nitzotzot there and erect the shul there, etc. But that. The time for that time for staying there has a date, and that date has come.
Right.
So there's that too.
All right. Thank you. Shkoyach.
Thanks.